the central message of this new report, co-authored by more than 21 institutions. By defining the nature and scope of the challenges faced by communities in Asia, the report also points to the solutions. In short, the legal recognition and empowerment of communities offers the most effective, equitable, and scalable solution at our disposal. There is now unprecedented and growing support for this agenda amongst the world's government, companies, civil society organizations, and landscape-level investors. We now have a robust framework such as the Land Rights Standard to support right-based actions and investment. And as made clear with this report, right holders are themselves mobilized, coordinated, and capable of delivering the changes that are so urgently required. I am so excited about this report, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you for your kind attention.
We would like to thank Dr. Solange for critically highlighting the issues in terms of biodiversity conservation in Asia, and specifically highlighting that it's really critical to acknowledge the contribution of the indigenous and local communities in terms of biodiversity conservation and climate action. Also to look into how there has been gross human rights violations, and rightly emphasizing we need system change to take this ahead. So we'd like to thank Dr. Solange, President, Rights Resource Initiative, for sharing her critical thoughts in today's report relief and this important dialogue which we are having, because it's a really, really big day for all of us, indigenous and local communities organization. As you rightly said, 20 plus indigenous and local community organization have come together to release this report. So thank you, Dr. Solange, for your sharing and for your words. Now, I would like to invite Ome Gam, General Secretary, Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, to share the key findings of the report.
Thank you, Archana, and greetings to all of you. I'm also excited that this report is being finally released today, and I would like to congratulate all those who have put in immense effort in preparing this report. This report presents several case studies demonstrating indigenous and local conservation leadership, what they are capable of and how their capabilities can be enabled and harnessed, and concludes with a need for devolution of authority, democratization of conservation governance, and recognition of the sovereignty over the lands, territories, and resources. This report also questions the predominant mainstream fortress approach to conservation and spatial targets that predominantly focus on the area that should be conserved rather than address how such spaces should be conserved and by whom. Now, I would like to start with some of the select findings in this report. According to RRI, only 8.7% of the region's territories held by indigenous peoples and local communities are legally recognized, which means that there are large areas that are still not legally recognized. And this amounts to a combined territories of 4 countries, that is Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, PDR, and the Philippines, amounting to about 140.3 million hectares. Now, that is the unrecognized scenario, scenario of the unrecognized territories. The other aspect is the scenario of protected areas in Asia. As of October 2021, protected area covers circa 15.37% of the region, which is about 478 million hectares. And further within this, following the IUCN categories 4 to 6, which is often regarded as more egalitarian in terms of management and use permission. Of these, 37% are governed by federal or national ministries or agencies, which actually means that the areas and land managed or controlled by indigenous peoples and local communities are far lesser. Now, given this, let us also look at the global ambition of expanding protected areas towards 50% coverage, which will have, of course, severe implications with regard to a huge percentage of population in Asia that numbers to around 860 million and constitute about 20% of the population in the region. So this would have huge consequences. This is what the report shows. So if anything that is positive to be expected from this proposed expansion of protected areas, current trajectories must drastically change. That is what the report shows. However, in my opinion, the picture is more gloomy than bright because of the pervasive lack of adequate rights or the enforcement of existing rights under the formal conservation management. This is a deep political problem that requires transformation, and therefore the context of why we need to revisit this human rights-based approach to conservation. Next slide, please. I want to also highlight a little bit on the significance, some of the significance these reports provides, and that is on the human rights-based approach to conservation. I think we got the wrong slide. Can we go back? Now, what this entails, among other things, is that is a reversal of the notion that rights-based approach means participation of indigenous and local communities in the current mainstream protected areas management system. So we have to recognize without pretense what is inherent to individuals and collective, individuals and the collectives. That is recognizing our permanent sovereignty over our lands, territories, and resources. And this also as the basis for framing institutional reforms and practices, including conservation regimes. This is what the right-based approach is talking about. Now, this also implies supporting and participation by both state and non-state actors in legitimate conservation actions of rights holders, contributing technically and analytically and financially. So it is not the other way around, but the state and non-state actors should participate in the rights holders' actions in the effort for conservation and sustainability. Now, the other aspect that the report also importantly touches upon is to differentiate the difference between governance and management. And this should be clear when we talk about right-based approach. What this means is who is participating and being included in whose project, who is setting the agenda. That is a question about indigenous sovereignty and autonomy, as Archana also was talking about. So governance encompasses who has the power to set the agenda, who makes decisions regarding appropriate actions, how the decisions are being made, in what authority, with what responsibility, and who is accountable for actions. So in contrast to this, management involves the action taken to complete the objectives already decided or the programs already decided by those who have set the agenda. So when we talk about right-based approach, human rights-based approach, we have to be clear with this differentiation, and governance is what indigenous peoples and local communities are talking about. The other important point that we're also stressing, the report also stresses, is about indigenous leadership, customary institutions and collective initiatives of the communities, which should be recognized as legitimate and invaluable in conservation initiatives. This is because our leadership system differs in which capabilities are determined by the ability to create a collective community consciousness that embodies a balanced relationship with non-human nature, because they are also recognized as equal beings. And community living represents a cultural structure that is predicated upon deep beliefs of living a balanced life in harmony with Mother Earth and the universe. Further, in the community and leadership consciousness of indigenous peoples, land today represents horizontal inequality. And for indigenous peoples, it has always been that land is the source of freedom and the basis for equality and sustainability of life on the planet. And therefore, human rights-based approach to conservation becomes very important. Now, when we talk about human rights-based approach to conservation, we must also ensure, next slide please, as to how global commitments support existing initiatives of indigenous and local communities, and it is not hijacked. No? To me, the answer is in understanding fully the need for recognizing our permanent sovereignty and our governance systems, and having some faith in the numerous local struggles on the ground. This may sound like stretching our imagination too far, but a recent study found the co-occurrence of positive conservation and well-being were more likely in initiatives governed and led by communities, in contrast to conservation governance regimes controlled externally by the state, private sector, or NGOs, were found to be 10 times more likely to provide negative outcome on both well-being and conservation, which you can also find in the report. So what we need to look at is how do we then connect all these local struggles. I believe that this is possible if we give our effort in bringing together local struggles by creating shared vision and trust to build solidarity for action towards conservation and sustainability. For instance, this report is to bring together people for creating shared vision, and AIPP has also initiated several processes. Example, we have initiated in developing national land rights strategies in 7 countries for creating national and regional land rights strategies. We have also conducted studies and developed collective protective mechanisms for outscaling across Asia for the protection of lands and territories and resources based on indigenous values and principles. We are also conducting regional exchanges among networks and good practices. For example, the Tagel system in Malaysia, which the report also carries, is about these inland fisheries and river management systems, is now being also promoted in Thailand. And also like the homecoming movement of indigenous youth in Indonesia is also being used as a huge inspiration among boys and girls in Asia in reviving indigenous knowledge systems, practices, and promoting conservation. So this initiative across Asia needs to be recognized, harnessed, and supported if we are to be successful in connecting local struggles. Now, there are many recommendations in the report, but I want to highlight some of these important recommendations that has come in the report. One is to uphold the distinct and differentiated rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, including their right to self-determination, locally adapted governance systems, institutions, and culturally appropriate land use priorities. Second is to prioritize institutional reforms towards recognizing the right to permanent sovereignty of indigenous peoples over their lands, territories, and resources, and support local governance institutions and decision-making platforms to strengthen joint learning, resolve conflicts, redress grievances, and develop life plans as well as equitable benefit sharing approaches. Third is increase direct funding to indigenous peoples and local communities, including mechanisms for direct access and management by them for climate conservation and biodiversity programs, including those funded bilaterally through multilateral development banks or private sectors, and including nationally determined development funds. The fourth is establish independent grievance redress, accountability, and due diligence mechanisms with the support of regional indigenous federations, the UN's Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the UN High Commission for Human Rights, the CBD Secretariat, and IUCN to strengthen accountability of conservation efforts, redress infringements of human rights, and enforce compliance. And lastly, which is the most important, that is to end killings and establish and finance nationally accountable reparation mechanisms to address past and present human rights violations in state-sanctioned protected areas, as well as privately managed conservation areas. Now I will end by just giving a few thoughts on the way forward. As I have shared, that connecting and consolidating the struggle of different local initiatives across national context is very important. And then how these downstream initiatives where actions are taking place are linked to the regional and global processes in the discourses. And there are now many global processes that is happening, whether it's the food system, the biodiversity, climate change, and ecosystem restorations. These connections are to be made so that the transformation that is happening at the local and national level also leads to transformation at the global level. So that linkage needs to be really built, and that is where our effort is. And AIBB is doing its best, and of course with its networks and RRI and so on. Thank you very much, Archana.
I would like to thank Ome Gam for this sharing on the key findings of the report. After hearing his presentation, I strongly feel that this report is one of the key landmarks in this entire discourse, highlighting the Indigenous perspective on biodiversity conservation. And the sharing by Ome Gam on the difference between governance and management is, I think, very, very crucial. And for me, as in young Indigenous women, I think it's really important for us also to know how these terminologies have been used in this entire discourse and what it means from an Indigenous person lens, and also highlighting on the human rights based approach, like going much deeper into its sharing and emphasizing on Indigenous sovereignty, solidarity, collective initiative, and autonomy. I think these sharing has been really, really inspiring for me personally, and I am sure it has been really, really critical and insightful for everyone present here. And I just want to congratulate everyone, all the organization who have come together to come up with this report, because hearing the presentation on the key findings of the report just emphasizes that we have come a long way, and this is one step ahead in terms of our struggles and assertion, highlighting the key issues, challenges, way forward, and our perspective in this entire discourse of biodiversity conservation. So I would like to thank once again Ome Gam for sharing this critical insights from the report. I would like to move ahead to our next panelist. And I would like to introduce Dr. Sindhu Prasad Dungana. Dr. Sindhu Prasad Dungana is the Joint Secretary of Nepal's Ministry of Forest and Environment. Dr. Sindhu's research focuses on political ecology, RED+, and environmental governance. He has worked extensively on issues surrounding governance, quality of community-based forest management systems in Asia, and gender equality. Besides supporting the creation of gender focal points across sectors of Nepal's government, he is the gender focal point at the Ministry of Forest and Environment and formed a gender working group comprising of all gender focal points and representatives from government, community, and private sector organization in the forestry sector. In the pursuit of gender parity, he introduced a system in the Ministry of Forest and Environment to help that women are included in the task forces and committees formed by the ministry. We would like to hear from Dr. Sindhu about his thoughts on the report which is being released today. We would like to hear his recommendation and how these recommendations from this report can also be applied in the context of Nepal, and what can governments do to make human rights-based conservation a reality, and what are the challenges faced in order to implement this. Dr. Sindhu, we would like to hear from you.
Thank you, Archana. First of all, I thank the organizers, RII and other institutions for sharing this earth-breaking report and inviting me as a panelist to this grand event. Actually, the report is fabulous. I believe the report will inform policymakers, conservation authorities, and other concerned actors in Asia to be sensitive to human rights issues of indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and other marginalized groups around protected areas. I can't agree more on the conclusions and recommendations made in the report, particularly the conclusion that the contribution of indigenous peoples and local communities through their customary practices to biodiversity conservation, sustainable management of natural commons, and landscape restoration is substantial globally. But the customary practices and grassroots conservation leadership are being threatened by national governments, commodity-driven private companies, and other controlling authorities. I also fully agree with the recommendation that land right standard will be an initiative to recognize, respect, and adopt efforts made by indigenous peoples and local communities in conservation and climate actions. Nepal is a party to a number of multilateral environmental agreements, including ILO Convention 169, UN RIPS, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Convention on Biological Diversity, Paris Agreement, Nagoya Protocol to CBD, and RED+. The recommendations made in the report would be instrumental for the country to make its conservation efforts more IPs and LCs friendly. As Nepal is globally renowned for its community forestry program, it's almost half of national forests are being managed by around 30,000 community groups. The recommendation of the report can inform us to make these groups more inclusive in terms of its leadership from indigenous peoples, women, and other socio-culturally marginalized communities. At the same time, Nepal has around 25% of the country's area under protected area systems. Although local people are partially involved in managing local resources in buffer zones around protected areas, this effort is yet to fully recognize the roles and rights of indigenous peoples and local communities in natural resource commons in and around protected areas. As a party to those many environmental agreements and a recipient of climate finance from global sources such as Green Climate Fund, Global Environment Facility, Climate Investment Fund, Adaptation Fund, and RED+. Nepal is politically committed to addressing, respecting, and recognizing the rights of indigenous peoples, local communities, and women in development efforts. These initiatives will include full environmental and social safeguards that include free prior informed consent for project implementation, full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in conservation and climate actions, respecting customary tenure systems and equitable benefit sharing, among others. Tenure reforms of community-based forestry is another area where the government of Nepal should be working in future. These reforms include, but are not limited to, full authority to self-governance of the group, formal recognition of customary rights and practices, formal recognition of communal land rights, and full authority to sustainably managing and using resources, which are yet to be achieved. There are challenges to tenure reforms in land and natural resource commons. There are challenges to shifting paradigm from dominant conservation modalities that are still based on command and control measures to more human rights-based conservation efforts, transforming protected areas that are still considered to be protected under military surveillance to linking with the indigenous peoples and local communities living in and around the areas as stewards of ecosystem conservation is a challenge. I believe conservation concept should not be limited to protected area systems. Customary practices, traditional knowledge, and customary community conserved areas should also be considered equally important for biodiversity conservation, natural resource management, landscape restoration, emission reduction, and climate actions. Thank you very much.
We would like to thank Dr. Sindhu for his sharings from Nepal, and would like to thank him for reaffirming the need of recognition of land rights of the indigenous and local communities, and sharing critical perspectives from Asia in terms of biodiversity conservation and climate action. So thank you, Dr. Sindhu. We are really grateful to have you today amidst our midst in this report release and this critical dialogue on biodiversity conservation and human rights. And now moving on to our next speaker, we have Saudara Peter Kalang from ICCA Consortium. Peter Kalang from Sarawak, Malaysia, is a Kenya, one of Borneo's indigenous ethnic groups. After many years of social engagement, Mr. Kalang founded the Persatuan Kenya Miri, PKM, a cultural and educational association to preserve the cultural heritage of Borneo's indigenous Kenya communities in 2006. A regular host for the ethnic Kenyan Miri FM radio broadcast, Talidio Kenya, on radio and television Malaysia. He is a knowledge keeper for his community. In 2011, to coordinate the resistance against the construction of proposed hydroelectric dams, 8 organizations formed a coalition called Save Rivers Network, which is an ICCA consortium member. Under Mr. Kalang's leadership as founding chairman, Save Rivers Network played a key role in stopping the construction of Baraam Dam in Malaysia. Mr. Kalang, we recognize the need for human rights-based conservation in action, and given your experience and leadership, we would like to hear from you, like how does the world needs to incorporate in human rights approach in biodiversity conservation, and what are the roadblocks which are most evident in pursuing this? And would also like to hear from you about the goal on 30 by 30 and how we can achieve and implement this report and such initiatives with collective solidarity. Mr. Kalang, we would like to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Archana. And greetings from Sarawak, Malaysian Borneo. First of all, I'd like to emphasize that ICCA stands for, it's an acronym actually, from which means Indigenous Community Conservation Area. Indigenous ICCA refers to the territory of life for the indigenous people and local community, IPLC. So ICCA is a consortium which at the moment comprises of organizations from 90 countries around the globe. It is made up of IPLCs, NGOs, and honorary members. The purpose of the consortium is to support the IPLC in protecting and conserving the territories of life. So protected areas are often perceived and portrayed as the main tools for nature conservation. In reality, indigenous people and local communities are the unsung heroes of conservation. We, the indigenous people, are conserving an outsized proportions of the world's biodiversity and ecosystem, including at least 1/3 of the intact forest landscape globally. For this reason, the reason for this is because of the deep connection of our people to the land and territories. We conserve an outside proportion of the world's biodiversity and ecosystem through our governance system and cultural practices. The caring for and the sustaining of territories is part of our identity, part of our customary laws and values, and part of our way of life. So learning from the experience of ICCA, the most important is solidarity. The solidarity of members globally will amplify the visions, the claim that IPLCs secure their territories and to defend it from various threats. At the same time, to support, encourage self-strengthening process to continue across the ICCS. And the positive benefit, another one is knowledge exchange and cross-learning to support self-strengthening process. The next point is power and effectiveness of the indigenous knowledge, system and practice is in conservation, nature and resources management. And another important factor in this is in mapping and documenting. Maps and documents are important for strengthening the community's claim when negotiating with the government, while the process of mapping and documenting increases the awareness and technical skills of the communities concerned. So the need for change post-2020 framework would be appropriate recognition and support for the indigenous people and local communities and the effort to govern, manage, protect, and conserve the collective lands, waters, and territories on their own term, including through self-determining governance institutions, customary laws and protocols, and system of indigenous and local knowledge and sustainable use. So we must, in all this process, must place human rights at the heart of the post-2020 framework for conservation. There should be an increase of political and financial support for conservation by the indigenous people and local communities. In the importance of implementation of human rights framework as well as safeguarding and accountability mechanism in funding for conservation initiative implemented by the government and non-governmental organization. Regarding the roadblocks that you mentioned, I would mention these 4 areas that are very obvious. The slow and unambitious goals for customary tenures recognition. And then the target are under-resourced. Strength of the ICCA conservation initiative depends on the existence of effectiveness of the international and national instrument, just as much as it does on the strength of the IPLC themselves. National laws and policies do not comply with the global instrument framework. That's another factor. And then how can we achieve report and support the initiative to channel resources in the direct action of human rights-based outcome? We recommend that formation of alliance for advocacy to consolidate, strengthen the expertise, support IPLC in documentation and mapping, increase financial support for political and legal strength of IPLC on conservation governance, and mechanism for safeguarding human rights and accountability of conservation initiative. And then there should be a mechanism allowing transparency, security, and conservation of all state authorities, NGOs, CSO, IPLC, industry in the supply chain. So those are the things that we in the ICCA would really emphasize. And if we can achieve this globally, that would be great. And we can move from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sadara Peter. That was really, really amazing. And I was like very inspired as an Indigenous young person, like emphasizing on the message of solidarity, because I think it's crucial to work together and go ahead in terms of assertion and standing up for yourself and for your community. And as you rightly emphasized on solidarity, knowledge exchange, cross-sharing of the knowledge of Indigenous people, and also giving due recognition and understanding the Indigenous knowledge system. And you rightly emphasize that often we see the global policies and the national policies are very distinct amongst each other, and these differences also leads to implementation of this global policies and laws and policies, and that's what is really critical. And in terms of implementation, also contextualizing with the grassroots realities. And as you rightly said, like in terms of how to support the Indigenous communities and local communities, and what ICCA has been doing in terms of support, in terms of documentation and preparing MAT, which enables in terms of the right recognition. So we would like to thank you, Saudara Peter, for your key insights and sharing. And we are really honored to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. So everyone, those who have joined us today, I would like to share with you all that we have a Q&A option. Share your key questions which you have across. We'll be taking on the questions and answers ask those questions in the Q&A.
I think Archana's internet is having some problems. Is that the case? Can participants confirm?
Yes, we can't hear her.
Okay, I can jump in here while her internet gets sorted out. We did many prayers for everyone's internet. I think we needed to have done more for Archana's. So yes, thank you. Thank you, Saudara Peter, for your lovely comments. And now we are going to move to our following speaker. So the person who we are excited to welcome next is Ms. Shobha Madhan. This Shobha is going to do a special presentation. It's going to be the premiere of a music video, which has been put together by Nilgiris PVTG Federation, as well as the youth wing of Aman, SIPRED, and produced by AIPP. And this music video is part of a larger music album. So I'm very excited to share this with you now. So if you can hold on, I'm going to share it. All right.
மருத்துவ முறை இருந்தது அப்போ நம்மோட மருத்துவ முறை
மக்கள் வந்தனர், பழங்குடி மக்கள் வந்தனர், வளங்களை பறி கொடுத்து ஏமாந்தனர், மக்கள் ஏமாந்தனர். பண அறிவு நமக்கு தான் இருந்தது அப்போ, பண அறிவு நமக்கு தான் இருந்தது அப்போ, அறிவை எல்லோரும் இழந்தது ஏன் இப்போ? சுதந்திரமாயிருந்தனர் ஆதிவாசிகள், காட்டில் ஆதிவாசிகள், அதிகார வர்க்கத்தால் அடிமையானார்கள், இன்று அடிமையானார்கள். எல்லாமும் பெற்றனர் பழங்குடியினர் அப்போ, எல்லாமும் பெற்றனர் பழங்குடியினர் அப்போ, இருப்பதை இழந்து வாழும் நிலையேன் இப்போ. காடு நம் காடு நம் முன்னோர்கள் வீடு, காடு நம் காடு நம் பெற்றோர்கள் வீடு, தாய் வீடு நமது காடுங்க, தாய் வீடு நமது காடுங்க. வரலாமா தரலாமா பெருங்கேடுங்க.
What an energetic song that was. I am like super energized and I'm just speechless and super energized. So I would like to thank all the people and all the organization who have come together to make this amazing video highlighting the resistance of indigenous and local people and indigenous youth. And taking this ahead, I would like to speak to Shobha about this music video. I'm like super charged up and really very happy. So I would like to speak to Shobha about this music video. So Shobha, now I'm going to speak and I'm like very super excited about this music video. So I would like to say that this music video is produced by Asia Indigenous Peoples PAC and directed by Nilgiri's PVTG Federation, BAN, CRIFED and RRI. After screening of this video, we really need to talk to Shobha, who has played an important role in terms of sharing the key musics and insights from the indigenous youth from her place. So Shobha Madhan is the district coordinator of Gudalur block of Nilgiris, PVTG's federation in South India. She has been part of so many indigenous and youth activism for more than 10 years. She lives in an area surrounded by conservation areas, tea plantation, and settler encroachments in one of the parts of India with the oldest land disputes in the Supreme Court. She is Beta Kumar Bar Adivasi. So Shobha, we would like to invite you and thank you for joining us today in this dialogue. So Shobha, I'd like to hear from you, what are the main themes of this song and could you please explain that? Shobha, you're on mute.
Is it working now?
Yes, it's audible.
Am I audible now? So first of all, thank you for this opportunity in this panel to talk and then share about our issues and to launching this song in this politics and power and politics in this sharing panel group. So thank you, Archana, for inviting me this session. So this beat, I've been 5 years of work. We are working in my region, my hometown here. So my name is Shobha Madhan. I'm living in India, South India, Tamil Nadu state and Nilgiri district. So the theme was to work on, actually this song was made in Tamil language, in my regional language. An album made 10 songs. In that songs, one of the song this is, and you can, I think the link is in the chat. You can view it later. This song is particularly about universal message to the world, where the indigenous people, how they were living in the world, and the knowledges which we had it, and then the medicinal practices, we were independent doing all these things. And then during the period of colonization and then violation happening because of this conscious we are giving in the songs, in the video songs. Yeah, this is the main theme we were highlighted in the songs.
Thank you, Shobha, for sharing the main themes of the song, which you rightly said that it is an assertion and resistance in terms of the communities, those who have been residing there. So, Shobha, I would like to ask a few more questions. The next thing which I would like to ask from you, Shobha, is could you tell us more about your situation in Nilgiris and how do Indigenous people feel about the situation currently in the Nilgiris?
Well, in my area, we would say like it's a green desert. I would say it's a green desert, and also the main part of areas like monoculture practices, either it's the forest or in the plantation. So in the plantation, in the sense of agriculture practices, like this, half of the forest is deforested for the tea plantation. That is, I would say, like a green desert. And then other part of the forest is like a teak wood. So when we see in the forest means like throughout India also, we can see like a teak wood plantation. These are the conservation, we see it here. And here, when I see this tea plantation, I feel angry and I feel sad, and the indigenous identity is lost here, and also the animals and the environment is like crisis in the sense of it is not it is not a coexisting the indigenous people or animals or in this environment. So this is one of the things I feel very strongly feel sad about it. And also in here, like the indigenous people doesn't have a voice to raise what they wanted and what's their rights about it. And these are the things we feel it. And then mostly these indigenous lands are grabbed for this conservation aspect and industrialization. And also when we ask our rights, we were criminalized and we don't have any power or political agenda to put in forward for our rights. So these are the things we're facing in my state and also our district.
Shobha, you rightly shared, and it's really insightful to hear from you that how you shared that this place, you called it as green desert, and how there has been impacts of monoculture plantation, which also brings down to the thought which I have been always emphasizing, that indigenous people and local communities should be leaders of conservation and not victims of conservation. And you rightly emphasize on the ground reality which is happening in your place. And Shobha, we would also like to hear from you that during COVID, we saw a lot of indigenous resilience around the world. But as well as we also heard, and we also have seen in the reports that how the indigenous people were affected by COVID-19. We would like to know from you how there has been impact of COVID-19 in your area and what kind of resilience has the community done amidst the COVID-19. So we'd like to know from you the situation in your place.
Well, this is I would like to share my own experience during the COVID time when I was doing this when we facing the crisis. What I see, there is a two-way. One is the people who are residing inside the conservation forest area and outside the forest area. So the people who are inside the forest, they had a crisis in the sense like they never allowed to access the forest resources or do any traditional cultivation. So they had a very crucial time to have their sustainable during this corona time. Well, when outside where these outside of the forest who are residing indigenous people were sufficient, because that is a time they could be sustainable, because they had a piece of land and they had their own cultivation to survive in this period. So this is the two types of the impact I could see during the COVID time. There were people were facing during this COVID time also were criminalized, these indigenous people who are residing in the forest area. A lot of evictions happened in between. Yeah.
Yes, Shobha, we would also like to hear how can we support your initiatives, and what are the initiatives which have been undertaken by your organization in terms of biodiversity conservation?
So what we are doing here, we creating awareness among indigenous people in a grassroots level, creating awareness in the sense of our rights. We have a right to live here, and to claim our rights, our conservation management, how indigenous people can take care of our forest and our territory. So to that, we have recognized our rights in India, Forest Right Act 2006, but it is a stage of implementation very poor. And we are creating awareness on that. And also we are educating young children in a way of providing culturally appropriate education. That is, actually, indigenous people have practices that we learn everything from our elders. In the sense of by seeing, by doing, this is how we learn. Our knowledge increases. So this is how we are promoting education and creating awareness among the people about our rights.
Thank you. So
yes, these are things I would like to share. Yeah. And I think end up with this my speech now with thanks, Lord. And I would like to thank you, Archana, about allowing me to speak here in this panel. And I would like to thank Kafein from Indonesia and Preeti from Nepal, who were supporting us, and we had a lot of Zoom meeting, sharing photos and ideas. So that all contribution made it to bring this beautiful video songs about our forest wealth. So I would like to thank you and end up with my speech here now. Thank you so much for all the participants and panelists and who are given opportunity to speak here in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Shobha. It was really an honor to have you here, and I would really like to request everyone to give a huge round of applause for all the team members engaged in making up this video. This song is really, really powerful and is one of the way of showing resistance and assertion for our rights and standing up for ourselves. And it's beautifully done. It just gives us so much of strength, happiness, and powerful to work together. And songs, musics, and we have our own way of assertions as an Indigenous people and local community. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Shobha, for sharing your critical insights in terms of your region and also in terms of the music video. So going ahead, we'll be having our next speaker on board. And it's an honor for me to introduce and call upon Ibu Ruka Sombolongi, Secretary General from Aman. Ruka is the first female Secretary General of Indigenous Peoples Alliance of the Archipelago, Aman, the world's largest Indigenous Peoples organization. She is a Torajan from Highlands of Islands of Sulawesi. From 2009 to 2012, she was a member of Executive Council of Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. Ibu Ruka, how do we use the report and the data-driven advocacy to engage with government to convince them the value of human rights conservation. And we would like to hear from you, what is the role and responsibility of an organization like yours, Aman, in promoting effective change and transformation in the conservation strategy and environmental policy? What needs to be done together with others at regional and national levels? Ibu Ruka, we would like to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Bumi Melo. Selamat malam from Indonesia. Good evening.
Good evening from Indonesia.
Salam Nusantara. Terima kasih.
Greetings from the archipelago. Thank you very much for the question. The question is very interesting. I can see in this panel I met my friends and also the supporters of Indigenous Peoples, my guru who have been assisting me and also together with me to fight for the rights of Indigenous Peoples on conservation. The biocultural diversity conservation is not a separate agenda for us, Indigenous Peoples. We farm, we gather, hunt, we plant medicinal trees, and we use resources while conserving the nature, preserving ancestral knowledge and practices, and ensuring continuity between generations, all of which are done pursuant to the prevailing customary roles and leadership of the Indigenous peoples in their respective community. Conservation, as part of the holistic worldview of Indigenous peoples, is an advantage no one can afford.
Tidak pemerintah, tidak lembaga konservasi,
not government,
apalagi
conservation organization, nor corporation.
Sehingga konservasi sebagai sebuah agenda tersendiri dan terpisah.
When conservation is treated as a separate agenda, it is not in accordance with the holistic worldview of Indigenous peoples, which place humans as part of nature.
Konservasi modern yang kita kenal saat ini,
the modern conservation we know nowadays, which compartmentalize areas in the name of ecological value, which makes rigid boundaries and place all creatures in a hierarchical system, is a crime that has made
ini ketika mendengar kata konservasi,
the word conservation
itu masih menjadi buruk
as a nightmare for Indigenous peoples. So whenever Indigenous people hear the word conservation, they think that it is a nightmare. Why is it? Because animals and plants are seen as more important than humans. Indigenous people even are considered as a threat.
Pelanggaran HAM terhadap masyarakat adat atas nama konservasi sudah terlalu kita
There has been too many cases on human rights violations against Indigenous peoples in the name of conservation. The cases occurred all over the world, not only in Asia. And in many cases, this conservation even contributed to the extermination of Indigenous peoples. We have heard the case of tiger versus Adivasi in India. There is still a lot of complaint that we heard about conservation.
Misalnya saat ini ada sebuah kasus
another example,
yang sedang diinvestigasi
or another
oleh
case in the Republic of Congo. There is a case
yang biasa disebut
which is now under investigation.
Di wilayah yang disebut sebagai Mesok Protected Area.
The Pygmies people is living in the Mesok Protected Area.
Mereka mengalami pemukulan
and they were
pondok-pondok
beaten,
tempat tinggal mereka
and their
dibakar oleh yang
houses
namanya
were
eco
burned
guards
by
yang
what
katanya
so-called
disponsori oleh WWF.
WWF sponsored eco
Nah,
guards.
kasus ini menjadi
And this
menjadi salah
case
satu dari yang disebut sebagai principal
became
expected outcome dari project
one
GEF
of
UNDP.
the principal expected outcome of
Nah,
the GEF UNDP.
Di Indonesia, Taman Nasional,
In
hutan lindung,
Indonesia,
kawasan konservasi,
national
dengan
parks,
adat juga
protected forests,
adalah kisah klasik.
also
Kisah yang
became
biasa.
part of a classic case.
Komodo,
National parks and protected forests versus
Semende di
indigenous
Bengkulu,
peoples in various parts of Indonesia
orang
also
Moroneni
occurred.
di Sulawesi Tenggara,
The Komodo National
dan
Park
berbagai
in
kasus-kasus
East Nusa
lainnya.
Tenggara Province, Semende people
Di
in
Amerika
Bengkulu,
bahkan
Moroneni
kasus yang
people in
disebut sebagai
Southeast
salah satu
Sulawesi, and so
taman
on.
nasional pertama di
The
Amerika
Yosemite
Utara,
National Park in
kasus
California,
Yosemite, California,
US, for example.
dan juga kasus taman nasional yang disebut sebagai Yellowstone di
And the
Wyoming.
Yellowstone National Park in
Yosemite
Wyoming.
California ini
This Yosemite National Park in California
disebut sebagai melibatkan perang berdarah dan memusnahkan orang
involved the
Miwok,
bloody
dan
war
itu berlangsung
and
lebih dari 1 abad.
extermination of the Miwok people.
Yellowstone
This lasted for
yang
105
sangat
years.
terkenal
And the famous Yellowstone National
dipandang
Park
sebagai bagian
in
dari
Wyoming
penghancuran masyarakat adat yang
is
ada di sana.
deemed as part of
Orang
the
Shoshone,
process to
Lakota,
destroy the
Crow,
Shoshone,
dan banyak lagi
Lakota,
masyarakat adat
Crow,
yang hidup di situ
and
pada awalnya.
other indigenous peoples
Bahkan
living
agenda
in the area.
konservasi ini
And this conservation
dengan
agenda
sengaja dijadikan alat untuk menaklukkan
has
kedaulatan
even
masyarakat adat,
deliberately become a
mewujudkan
tool
apa yang disebut
to
sebagai the US
conquer the
Manifest
sovereignty
Destiny,
of indigenous peoples in
di mana
order
para
to realize
pendatang
what so-called the US
dianggap
Manifest Destiny,
memiliki
where
ini
the
adalah sebuah ideologi yang
newcomers
digunakan untuk membenarkan perampasan dan genosida terhadap masyarakat adat penduduk asli
action
di Amerika
is
Utara.
justified when they grab the land of indigenous peoples
Laporan
in Northern
lapor
America.
khusus PBB tentang masyarakat adat
The
sudah
report
membahas secara
of
detail tentang
the
ini.
United Nations Special Rapporteur on Indigenous
Praktek
Peoples
pelanggaran masyarakat
and
adat
Human
atas nama
Rights discussed
konservasi
this in
Excuse
detail.
me, the English speaker sound is
The
coming
strategies
in
and
the
practices of
English channel
violating
and
the
it's
rights of
disturbing
indigenous
interpretation.
peoples in the
If
name of
someone is hearing,
conservation
could you please ask the speaker to come out of the English channel? Thank you.
has been mentioned in her report. She pointed out
Ruka, excuse me, could I ask you to turn off the interpretation function? There's some disturbance. If you have interpretation switched on, it might be causing a disturbance.
Laura, please go ahead.
Are you okay now?
You switched off the interpretation?
You okay now?
Yeah. Can you switch off the interpretation on your Zoom? If
In
you're
Indonesia?
Yeah, switch it off completely. Just turn off interpretation.
Already did.
Okay, great. Let's continue.
You okay now?
Yes, thank you.
Oke. Ya, laporan pelapor khusus PBB sudah cukup jelas tentang ini.
the report of the United Nations Special Rapporteur is very clear. In Indonesia, the Komnas HAM, or the National Commission on Human Rights, has conducted national inquiry on human rights violation of indigenous peoples in forest area. This also shows that conservation contributes to the violations of indigenous peoples' rights in Indonesia. In Indonesia, we also have the Constitutional Court ruling number 35 that gives a mandate to return the customary forest to indigenous peoples. However, this mandate has been hampered by various policies, including policies on conservation. Various mechanisms, including kemitraan konservasi or conservation partnership, are aggressively promoted in customary areas to ensure that these areas do not return as the rights of indigenous peoples. So the partial understanding on indigenous peoples has caused the NGOs as the supporter of this mechanism. And this mechanism is also called as social forestry, and also a paradigm change in Indonesia. In fact, this mechanism that violates the rights of indigenous peoples is widely supported by NGOs. Durban Accord and Action Plan of 2003 has marked the commitment of various conservation organizations to respect indigenous peoples. However, based on the report of the UN Indigenous Peoples and Human Rights Reporters, the beautiful commitment on papers is still far from what's expected. Nowadays, humanity is at the crossroad as the impact of the climate change. Many believe that the 2030 biodiversity target will save the earth and mankind from extinction. Likewise, the government leaders at the COP26 believe that the carbon market is the way out. But I can say that all of these are false solutions because they're not providing a way out in the midst of this structural inequality that continues to deny and exclude indigenous peoples. The inequality facing indigenous peoples, this false solution will exaggerate the condition where indigenous peoples' territory were grabbed and dispositioned. Indigenous peoples around the world have managed to maintain at least 80% of the world's current biodiversity, including ecosystems that store carbons, such as forests, peatlands, and so forth. We should be grateful of this, and this is something that should not be taken for granted, because this is the result of the struggles of indigenous people with their sweat, tears, and even at the cost of their lives. We, indigenous peoples, can continue to maintain and even multiply the existing ones, but with various prerequisites. AMAN has a target to rehabilitate at least 15 million hectares of territories that has been destroyed and damaged by illegal logging and other illegal activities. But we cannot do it alone. We should do it together, collectively. The question earlier was about what we can do together. What we can do together includes promoting the legal recognition and certainty of the rights of indigenous peoples. This is the main issue in Asia. The rights of indigenous peoples have been denied. And of course, this should be supported with ample logistics so that we can protect the earth, protect the biodiversity, and rehabilitate what we already have, the biodiversity that we already have. The second thing that we can do together is the colonization of conservation. We have to stop the conservation that is forced and grab customary territories. And there should be a respect to aspect of indigenous peoples. And we have to adopt the indigenous people style conservation, and we have to make indigenous peoples as the best guardians of the earth. For conservation organizations, they need to implement their commitments to respect indigenous peoples. It should not only on paper. No action, talk only, no commitment, talk only. So the commitment should be implemented. The most important actor that we should take on board, because we have only this planet as our home. This is our home. We need, especially everyone who lives in the urban area, they must actively adopt environmentally friendly and human-friendly lifestyle. Citizens in urban areas must also actively urge their respective government, members of parliaments, companies, and conservation organizations to respect the best guardians of the earth, that is indigenous peoples. Those are the things that we can do together, because indigenous people cannot do this alone. Because it is not fair when all responsibilities are put on the shoulder of indigenous peoples and other just watch. So everyone on this earth has the responsibility to protect the earth, the humanity, and perform conservation within our own environment. If not now, then when? And if not us, then who? I think that's conclude my remarks. Let's do these things together. And once again, I would like to express my gratitude to all of you who have been supporting us, who have made the report, and who have supported the existence of indigenous people. Sampurasun, good evening, Bongi Melo, may peace be upon us all.
I think there might be an issue with Archana's internet. Thank you so much, Ruka, for those lovely comments. I'm going to invite Solange to take the stage and provide us with some closing thoughts. Thank you, Solange.
Thanks, Laura, and thank everyone, all the panelists. It has been very inspiring and a lot of good information and ways forward on how to take on the major recommendations from the report. I've really taken notes on many key recommendations, and I think we will not say it enough that legally recognized and protected indigenous peoples and local community land exhibit lower rates of deforestation, store more carbon, and hold more biodiversity. And I think that this is not really, research have shown it, and we all know it. So it's about, okay, how do we come up with alternative approaches? We have all heard also many challenges, but despite the gloomy picture, I mean, what I'm learning is that there is hope and there are solutions. And there are solutions, and in order for us to implement all these solutions that have been laid out, all the key recommendations that we heard, we need to work together. And I think Ruka talked about the need for collective action and just us working together to support the legal recognition of indigenous peoples and local community rights. We can do it, but we have to work together. It has to be collaborative. And just wanted to remind everyone that RRI is a solidarity network. So as a solidarity network, we definitely want to give more dialogue, more collaboration. And I think what we are seeing with this report, more than 21 institutions coming together and sharing really lessons learned from the field, from different countries, from different contexts is really key. We need more case studies like this to document how conservation is happening on the ground. but also to show how really we can work together to contribute to achieving the climate change agenda, but also to protecting biodiversity and our planet. And among the key recommendations, I think there's like a need to support youth, because what we have been seeing here that there's need for youth to participate effectively in decision-making processes. We also need to support youth activism and their role in conservation. And I would like also to bring back one thing that Ruka mentioned. Depending on whatever recommendations or solution we come up with, we need to address structural inequalities within, faced by Indigenous peoples and local communities. I mean, there's need for structural changes and need for transformative approaches to really deal with all the challenges. But I think we are in a good, trajectory. And again, together we can do it. I will not try to summarize it all because there have been so many key recommendations. But I'm sure if you read the report, you will see like all the key recommendations. And I think together we can start really seeing how we can implement those recommendations. On behalf of RRI, I want to thank you all for being with us today. And Archana, thank you very much for moderating this panel. It's always great to see youth activism and to see youth really taking the lead. We want to make that promotion and support that. Thank you. Over to you, Archana.
Thank you, Solange, for your remarks. And it was really nice to have you summarizing the key discussion which has been discussed today. And it was really, really inspiring and insightful conversation and dialogue today. So at this end of this dialogue and report release, I would like to thank all our co-authors who have made this report release possible. So I would like everyone to give a huge round of applause for our co-authors, co-hosts who have put in a lot of effort to bring this event and dialogue and report release together. I would especially like to thank all our panelists. It was really, really insightful and enriching experience hearing from you all. And a huge round of applause and a very big thank you to our interpreters who have made today's communication smooth and who have put in a lot of effort. And I must say it is because of the interpretation team we have been able to make this conversation in multilingual format, and we are truly grateful for all their efforts. I would like to thank everyone who are involved in the communication team and technical support team. Thank you so much for all your efforts. And I would also like to mention about a question and answers. Thank you for raising your critical questions. And I would like to thank all our panelists and speakers for going on to the question answer session and the point, and also answering the key questions which have been raised by all our participants. So thank you, panelists, for answering the questions raised by all the participants, and thank you, participants, for raising these questions, because it is through question and answer and dialogue we grow. And thank you, everyone, each and everyone who have joined us today. And I want to acknowledge that everyone has joined from a very, very different time zones. It is either early morning, evening, night, afternoon in respective places. And I would like to thank you all for all your dedication and effort. And thank you so much for attending this report release and this dialogue. And at the end, I would like to say that the more than 20 plus Indigenous and local organizations who have put in an effort to come up with this dialogue and report, which will be a huge source of assertion for us young people, Indigenous young people. And on behalf of the entire team, I would like to thank each and every one of you. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It was lovely having you all. Johar.
Thank you so much, Archana. I'd like to invite all of our panelists to come off video. We can kind of say bye, come off mute, come on video. Can fill up the space with all of these warm faces. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thanks, Laura.
Take care. Have a good evening.
Thanks to interpreter.
Yes, thank you to the interpreters.
Good to see you, Ruka.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
My Indonesian sister and brothers, Seti, Adam, Joe,